Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. And today, we got a treat for you. I'm really, really looking forward to this because this is the first time we've ever had a birth mum and a child on the show. So welcome to the show, Suzanne and Cynthia. Thank you for making time for us today.
Nice to be here, Simon. Thank you.
Yeah. We've just been having a chat, me and Suzanne. She's got family like 12 miles away from me in York, which is kind of spooky since we are probably 6,000 miles away. We're zooming
more
6,000 miles away from you guys in now. It's Idaho, isn't it? Is that right?
Yes.
Idaho. Boise, yeah, Boise. So yeah, I've never been to Idaho. Probably the closest I've got is LA when I was 13. So that's still probably 10 miles drive, is it from? I don't know. Or is it more than that? I don't know. I've been to Seattle. I've been to LA, but I've never been near Idaho. So, but last time I went to the States, I was in Nashville, and the guy that was organizing the conference was from Boise. Entrepreneur. I had 5,000 people there at the conference before
wow.
Before COVID, obviously. So how long have you guys been reunited?
About a year, a little bit more than a year. So a year in October.
Yeah.
October 12th.
Yeah.
So.
And how has that been?
It's been amazing. It's been just wonderful. We just ended up living 15 minutes apart, so we've been able to spend a lot of time together this year and really get to know each other and travel together and done all sorts of things. So it's been really a blessing.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe next time you travel together, you could travel over to see the friends in York, and we could and in the village up in the Yorkshire Dales, and maybe we could get to. That'd be great, wouldn't it? That'd be better because now we're about, I don't know, 18 inches. I'm 18 inches away from the screen approximately, but we are 6,000 miles away by Zoom. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. And what's it been like for you, Suzanne? How would you?
It's almost like there's a completion to my life, and it just feels like everything's kind of back the way it should be. And so it just feels so normal and natural, and it feels like she's always been here.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. I'm just going to share a little bit about my story about a connection with my birth mum, because she died probably 15 years before I started searching. But in the adoption file, I came across a letter from her to the social worker about a teddy bear that she'd given me, and I read this letter, and I felt at one with her. It's the spookiest feeling I've ever had. I felt at one with her through the letter, right, that she'd written 48 years before. And the tears came down my face and washed away any separation that I'd felt between us. So that was from a letter. And you've connected in person. So I would get the impact that had on me was humongously massive. But yours probably must have been about a million times different, I would guess, because it's not a letter. from a lady that unfortunately died. It's a real physical thing in the flesh. So you used the word completion, Suzanne. What does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, being a parent that releases a child for adoption, for me, she's always been part of my life. And even though, I didn't know what happened to her, she's always been there, just always been part of knowing that she might be out there, and wondering, how she is and what she's experienced. And, it was, I don't know, just it feels like all of my worst fears didn't come true. And all of my best hopes did. So it's a reunion that I never had hoped for. And it's more than just Cynthia and I together. It's our whole families merging together. And I think they all feel a sense of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really do.
I love that merge word. I came up for a metaphor for the thing that happened when I read this letter from my birth mum, which was, so I swim a lot, and I sometimes use a pool that's like a 50-yard long or 55-yard, 60-yard long pool, and it's got a riser in it, so they can make it from one big pool into two little pools. And how that works is that the riser comes out of the base of the swimming pool, and to cut it into two. And as I read that letter from her, I felt that the barrier between us had dropped to the floor, and the two pools had become one, and that's what came to my mind when you used that word merger, because it was like I was one pool, she was another pool, and the two pools merged together to form one big one. And the absence of difference, or absence of barriers between us, is called love, right?
Yeah. It's a great metaphor.
Yeah. What would you say to adoptees listening about this stuff? Fellow adoptees listening.
It's a hard question. I think because I think it's not always, I'm very aware that reunions are not always as easy or as positive as what Suzanne and I have had. And so I'm very, very aware of how fortunate we are. And so I don't know if I've reached a point where I have any advice to give.
Yeah.
I know it's a very emotional thing regardless. Every step, I started searching for my birth mother when I was about 18, and I'm in my 40s now, so yeah. It's been a long road, and it's always been really, really emotional on a gut level for me, and it's been so good and so fulfilling, to reconnect. But I know that's not the case for so many people, and so I don't know what I would say.
Yeah. Have you got anything, Suzanne, to say on
that? I guess today things are easier than they were in the past to make those connections again. And I think if people are interested, that there's a way to approach, potential parent-child relationships that have been severed, that we didn't have 20 years ago or 40 years ago. And so, you know, if that's a calling, I mean, certainly with Cynthia, she pursued this. And if she hadn't, we would never have found each other. So if, you know, you're being driven and you want to make that connection, then I think it's easier today than it ever has been. And to do so in a way that doesn't necessarily put you face to face right away, so that you have some breathing room to get used to the idea of, you know, having this relationship come back to you, and then go slow. You know, I think, you know, our first instinct was just like, okay, I'll see you in 10 minutes, you know, because we were so close to each other. But also just being concerned about going too fast in a way that would harm that relationship early on. And I think we were both very nervous about that just, you know, being hyper aware of the other person's sensitivity and, you know, experiences, and you know, and how the other members of the family would feel. So it was a lot to work through.
Yeah.
I was very concerned to make sure that my parents were okay, you know, that they felt comfortable before I rushed into embracing this new relationship. And thankfully, both of my parents have been really supportive and positive about this. So that's been great.
Yeah. I never ever told my mum that I was searching. Yeah, it's different for everyone. One of the things that that came to my mind as you were saying that, you know, your humbleness, your humility about no advice for anyone. I don't think we try not to do advice on this show, really. A thing came to my mind. I was talking to a fellow adoptee last night, and she said she said she knew lots of other adoptees and about who had searched, and it hadn't always worked out, but nobody had ever regretted it. Nobody had ever regretted it. And I was listening to something on a audio book last night, and it used the word roller coaster, and I thought, you know, there's that in that during that search process, there's that it is an emotional, and life's a roller coaster, right? So, but especially during that, you know, you're talking about a 20-year search, Cynthia, you know, and you mentioned that last time, and you also mentioned that I scribbled down my notes. You mentioned, and I don't know who said this, but you said one of you apologized for not starting looking earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the metaphor that came to mind about the emotional roller coaster is one that came from a mentor of mine, a guy called Michael Neal, who talked about yes, an emotional roller coaster, but that emotional roller coaster is on a massive barge, right, floating gently down the river. I mean, it's a huge barge, right? This is just a metaphor. You know, it's going to have to be a really big boat to take a roller coaster. But you know, underneath, we go through these highs and lows, and at another level, there's a deeper sense of who we are behind the ups and downs of our emotions, right? Does that make any sense?
That totally makes sense.
Yeah. And another one that pops into my head from a mentor of mine called Richard Wilkins, he says that happiness and sadness are merely the high and low tide on a big sea called contentment.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And what we're looking for contentment. We're looking for peace. We're looking to navigate life, the ups and downs of life, more with more peace. And that's stepping back. You know, people use this word perspective, don't they? So the perspective is stepping back from the highs and lows, or getting a better vantage point. And you know, when we see better, we can kind of do better. So I just wanted to share that, really, because another word that you shared from my notes last time is that you're aware that reunion can be messy and messier. So I shared that emotional roller coaster and getting off the emotional roller coaster and the peace stuff on the basis that we don't want to be promising everybody this Hollywood happy ending, right? Mm-hmm. So when I was in LA, we stayed in Hollywood. We did the British touristy things that people do. So yeah, we went on roller coasters at Disneyland. We went on Knott's Berry Farm, and we went to Universal Studios, and we did all this. And Hollywood is selling as a happy ending, isn't it? It's like escapism. Well, these days Disney's on streaming into our homes, isn't it? But Disney films, you know, your cinema is that escapism, and we're not about escapism on Thriving Adoptees. I don't think we're about reality rather than some Hollywood dream.
One of the things I think that makes it so emotional and can make, you know, reunion be messier is because there's so much of a sense of identity, you know, with your parents, you know, and where you come from and who you are. And so when you're confronted with, you know, the biological element of that, you know, like, then that can be really emotional, and it can change how you think about yourself, you know, and that's always really a little bit scary and uncertain. I was stunned by how many strange similarities I had to Suzanne, like not just in how we resemble each other physically, but we were both in theater. We both played the same like small part in this little Neil Simon play when we were 16. You know, we both had some similar interests. We have very similar tastes in a lot of things, you know. And I think before I had really been in the sort of nurture versus nature debate, I had been nurture all the way. Like I had believed, and people had told me that, you know, I resembled my adoptive mother, you know, my mom, and that I share some of her mannerisms, and I do, you know. Someone told me that last week. We were having pictures taken, and the photographer told my mom and I, you know, that she could see the resemblance between us, and we don't super resemble each other, but like it's more than the physical. So I really believe that I was formed mostly from that nurture. And then I met Suzanne, and I was like, oh wait, maybe not. There's a lot of DNA in here. There's a lot of genetics and some really spooky similarities and things that were alike, you know. So
yeah. You said that it can change the way you think about yourself. So how has the way that you think about yourself changed, Cynthia?
I think as part of a bigger whole, some of it is that it just changed the narrative that I was used to thinking about myself. So I grew up with a certain narrative, which sort of sounded like a fairy tale, like this childless couple who really wanted a child, and this brave young woman who gave this child to them, and then they all lived happily ever after. That was the story I grew up with. I always knew that I was adopted, and my parents told the story that way. And in a way that felt incomplete for me, because I recognized that I was the ending of their story, you know, but there was another story there. But I had constructed a narrative of how that had happened based on things that my parents had told me, that things that they had known. And I think what this situation with Suzanne has helped me realize and changed is that each of us in this family, in both sides of this family, have their own narrative about what happened and how it happened. And it's very different. And that was a real shakeup, because it wasn't quite, you know, what I had grown up thinking about. And it does change how the whole narrative works, you know, in my mind. Certainly my mom's narrative is different than my narrative, is different than Suzanne's, you know, and Suzanne's mom, and like all of these people who are connected, have a slightly different version of the story. So it's just, you know, you grow up having this story about your life and what it is, and then it's different, and you kind of have to deal with that and work through it.
Yeah.
And that can be true whether you're adopted or not, but
yeah, it definitely is, right? Everyone has their own version of events.
Yeah. When Simon was talking about the pools, it made me think of like, it felt like, you know, I've had multiple lifetimes almost of just in this lifetime of like, you know, this was who I was during the 20s and who I was during the 30s. And then when we met, it felt like it finally all merged together and became one, you know, so it's really interesting. But I think those narratives may be part of everyone's life in some way.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree. Before I get onto that, though, I'm going to ask you. Just going to plug in on the narrative, carrying on the narrative theme. So, you know, one of the reasons that I got in touch with Cynthia is that she's a writer. She's written a book, right? So you find links in the listeners. You'll find links, as always, to our guests' socials and their websites and blogs and books and stuff in the links. Quick plug. Cynthia's not going to mind that. Okay. We're finding about her, not her books today. But as a writer, Cynthia, and are you into writing as well, Suzanne? Is that one of the similarities?
No? Oh, don't shake your head. Yes, you are.
I'm not a published, distinguished writer like Cynthia, no, but I love to write.
Well, distinguished, that's a great word, isn't it? So have you heard this phrase, the unreliable narrator?
Sure.
Yeah. Do you want to explain that? Because I figured that you might explain that better than me.
Well, an unreliable narrator is like when you're reading a novel and it's being told to you by this narrator, and as a reader there comes a point where you realize that perhaps this character who is narrating to you is not telling the truth, or that they don't realize the truth, right? Like sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that the narrator is lying, but it might mean that the narrator can't see what you as the reader can see. And so you can't really rely on their version of the truth, or their version of the story, that there are going to be inconsistencies or things that aren't true within that. So you should approach that narration with a little bit of skepticism. I always like narrators like that, where you can sort of see through what they're saying to what's actually there.
Yeah. So they're unreliable is the yes. is the key thing, right? And so it may or may not be lies. So how this relates to what I'm talking about and what Suzanne shared in terms of this isn't just about adoptees, right? So I've done my self-exploration work over the last 13 years, always with non-adoptees and with people that have nothing to do with adoption. And what I found from that is that we all have an unreliable narrator.
Mm-hmm.
We all have a voice in our head that lies more than it tells the truth. And most of us, and I'm talking about me in particular here, don't realize that. You know, I spent 5 days on a retreat. Essentially, everybody got everybody shared their story, but not just what had happened, how they'd made it, how it had made them. There's 8 of us on this group. And it's called Broadband Consciousness, if anybody wants to look it up. Put it into Google. Broadband Consciousness is run by Richard and Liz. What became clear is that everybody was believing the voice in their head, and everybody's the lies that we were believing about ourselves are not actually ourselves. And we were spending an inordinate amount of time trying to shut that voice up. And I came to that retreat with some insecurity around business, not being good at business, not being as good as my dad at business or my mum at business for that matter, and not being good enough on the on the adoption stuff, the given away thing. And so what it transpired is we spend an inordinate amount of time trying to silence the voice, and instead of but when what we resist persists, right? So what we fight against gets bigger. It becomes more and more of an issue. And as Richard, who runs this Broadband Consciousness course, talks about, it's a lot easier to actually identify the unreliable narrator, realize it's not us. Okay, so it's not who we are. We are the one hearing the voice in the head. We're not the one saying the voice. But the voice in our head's got our accent, right? And it sounds like us, so we think it's us. And it's far easier. Life is far easier when the unreliable narrator is not relied on anymore, and in fact becomes an opinion that we no longer value.
Yeah, I think one of the more freeing realizations I've had in my life is that I am not my thoughts. You know, like it's, my thoughts are not the definition of me. They're separate from me, you know, like they're generated by me, but like, so I think that's along the same lines, right? Like,
yeah. Well, yeah, until you said generated by me. So it depends what you mean by me. So they can be generated by either the truth of who you are or the unreliable narrator. Right? So the voice in my head is 99.9% BS. But I did have a little voice in my head back in 1993. This is to do with the lady that's now my wife, Lynn. So we went out. We used to work together. She was my boss. So we went out for lunch, as we often did. Sometimes there was 3 of us, 4 of us. That day was only 2, and she told me that she found out that her fiance was cheating on her, and again, and you know, he'd had his final warning, and she'd kicked him out. And the little voice in my head said, maybe there's a chance here for you, Midlin. That's what the little voice in my head. But so there was truth to that, and you know, 4 years later, whatever, we got married and we're still together. It'll be 25 years it'll be 25 years on the 29th of November. So we're we're recording this on the 10th of November. So the voice in my head is 99. That was the 0.1% thing, right? When the voice on my head was a good one. 99% of it is rubbish. But it's a matter of like who is creating this voice. I'm totally with you on the we are not our thoughts. The distance between us and our thoughts is a life-changing realization when it's kind of embodied, and so I think of, you know, something that we glimpse with our eye. That's one level of seeing things. Then we have something that we get as a concept in our head. Then we have something that we get in our heart, and then it becomes something we get in our bones. So, like, when we get that, like, it sounds like you've got that in your bones, in your gut. You truly believe that we are not our thoughts, but at that level, it makes a difference. It's you know, reading it on a bumper sticker and thinking, oh, yeah, that doesn't change. That doesn't change our lives. So most of the time, I think, from me, you know, that we are coming from so 99.9% of what goes on in my head is unreliable narration, and I didn't create that. It's not coming from me. It's coming from this alter ego, this unreliable narrator. So that's a kind of a splitting thing. What do you make of that, Suzanne? Is there anything there? Does that anything land there for you? Anything comes to your mind?
I think that it's more complicated than we really know, and that I tend to avoid grasping to one theology or one idea among us, that we experience reality in very different ways, and that it's, you know, we're all on a journey. So it's, you know, as far as the voices that we hear, I've had plenty of times when instinct, if that's one of the voices, has been something that served me really well and kept me safe, and has made good decisions, you know, for the directions and stuff that I've gone, about people, about their ability to be honest, and you know, who people are at a deeper core. But I think that we have to define that for ourselves individually, and that it's difficult to do in a broader sense for other people.
Yeah. So you use the word instinct, and you know, the word that comes to my mind is kind of gut instinct, and gut instinct and brains can be different things, right?
Yeah.
So what have you learned about yourself through this, and what are you learning? Right, I'm a lifelong learning fan, you know, and so whenever I say learned, I always try and say I'm still learning, you know, because the journey that you refer to, Suzanne, is ongoing, isn't it? And it is an ongoing learning journey. So what are you learning about yourself?
I think that I have, because of the outcome, really, that I've come to really forgive the 16-year-old who made the decision and the decisions that she made, that her instincts were pretty right on, and that her distrust of adults at the time were well deserved. That
sorry, what was well deserved?
Distrusting the adults that were trying to make the decisions for me at the time. I think that that I stayed true to what I instinctually thought were the best ways forward, and I'm glad now that, you know, I'm relieved that they turned out the way that they did, but it was something that I had to live with, not knowing, for 40 years, you know. So it's more of a sense of relief and just more forgiveness and trust, and even at that younger age that I was able to navigate this, despite having well-intentioned adults and sometimes not so well-intentioned adults trying to drag me in other directions, and that standing my ground was the way to go. So it was, yeah, so I'd go back and thank her now if I could. So.
Yeah. And how, I mean, there's you used 2 words or 3 words. You talked about not knowing and then relief. What does that look like? How was the not knowing? What was the not knowing like, and what was the relief like?
I'm not sure that there's a way to describe it, but it is one of the most, well, it is the hardest thing I've ever had to do, is giving up Cynthia as a baby. And there is no part of you that does not go through the anguish of that, and relive it. So it's, you know, it is, yeah. And then the not knowing part is also part of it. You know, not knowing, is she safe? Not knowing, is she healthy? Not knowing if she's loved and cared for. And at some point, you have to trust the universe a bit, that you made the best decision you could, and then accept the consequences, but hope for the best.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like peace now.
Now,
No.
yeah.
I bet your unreliable narrator was going absolutely ape for years, right?
Well, I had good reason to, because the hospital, when Cynthia was ill, when she was right after she became ill, right after she was born, a couple of days after, and I found out about that, but they wouldn't let me see her, and so they wouldn't give me any information about her. When I called or tried to find out more about it, they told me that she probably wasn't going to make it. I think they were just trying to stop me from pursuing my parental rights at the time. And
wow.
So yeah, it was pretty ugly. It was actually horrific what they did. But
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah. I was at our goddaughter's 21st birthday a couple of weeks ago, and so I've been friends with her dad for probably 30 years, and it was an honor to be godfather. And also, why, do you know, like, why would you pick Simon to be godfather? Because he's not really into religion or anything like that. Anyway, but we rarely, you know, we rarely speak on the phone. I can only remember one time we ever spoken on the phone. We meet down the pub, or we go out for dinner, or, you know, we have dinner parties. Anyway, I remember his daughters got hydra. It's a form of, I can never remember how you say it, but it's a form of dwarfism. Okay, and I remember him ringing me the night before she was due, the daughter was due, and saying that at the last minute they'd discovered this that had a scan and they hadn't seen it before, but they discovered this form of dwarfism with the scan, and they didn't think she was going to make it. And that's 21 years ago, right? So you're going back 40 years. I remember pacing around the lounge, listening to my friend Jonathan talking about this stuff, and like my heart going out for him, and crying, and you know, the girl's not going to make it, and preparing them for the worst, right? And this was, yeah, and then she did, you know, and 21 years later, I was at this, it was a small party, like 30, 40 of us, and I was chatting to a guy, so another one of their friends saying, and he says, "Are you gonna make a speech?" It's like, "Godfather," and I'm like, "No, I can't." Anyway, I did a little speech, and I told her a little bit about that story of the night before that she was born, and how she'd made it, and it just, like, as soon as you said that, it just kind of coming back to me, and how that must have felt, you know, that despair, and how out of order, to put it very mildly, they were at the hospital to leave you with that, try and shut you down by sharing lies with you. I mean, that's,
yeah, it's outrageous.
Yeah, it's outrageous. It's outrageous, and it's a lot more outrageous than an unreliable narrator. It's downright untruths, right? So how you got through that for 40 years, I don't know. Or, yeah, you know, like as best you could, I guess. I mean, I listen to some podcasts and people try and reduce it down to mindset, and you know, how did you do this? How did you? Well, we don't know. We haven't got a clue, right? Most of the time, how we get through stuff, and they try and retrofit a strategy or a mindset strategy over something that is completely and utterly unfathomable, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess that's part of the reason that we want to also share this story too, because there's other 16-year-old girls out there. And in the States right now, you know, a lot of them are facing state governments that don't allow for abortion. They are, you know, going to be forced into going through adoption. And I don't know that our states are not going to be less bullies than they were back when I was 16. And, you know, being in that position as a 16-year-old, the adults have the power, you know, and it's very hard to maintain that power and stay true to what decisions you think are the most important ones to make. So there are a lot of other people out there that are affected by, you know, that's what's happening today.
Yeah. I was chatting to a guy at the swimming pool today, and he was saying that he's snapped a tendon in his arm, and 4 people have said that it can't be fixed. A doctor has said it can be fixed, but he won't do it because this guy's 70, and the guy can't afford to have it done, go private. So here in the UK, we have this National Health Service thing, so everybody gets that healthcare free. And some people buy it. Some people buy health insurance. Some people get, like in the States, some people get health insurance with their business. And you can have health insurance, or you can pay, if you don't have health insurance, you can pay for that, pay for each operation. And the thing that came to me was, all this stuff is just an opinion. So 4 people said it couldn't be fixed. 1 person said it could be fixed. So it's all just like, we think we kind of, these people with power, these people with authority, we think that they're right, and they're just they're just sharing, and they're just sharing their opinion. But because they've got a white coat on, right, we trust them. And the thing that popped into my head as I was driving back from the pool is that it wasn't so long ago that doctors were promoting cigarettes. Doctors, like in the 50s and 60s, doctors appeared on TV adverts saying smoking was good for you. And for some reason, we seem to forget the fact that doctors are just sharing their opinions, you know.
Yeah, I would just clarify there that it wasn't the doctors, it wasn't the nurses, for the most part, that were causing the challenges that I faced. It was the system, the state, the adoption agency, the I guess one of the nurses, at least one of them at the hospital was horrific. But yeah, it was also family members, and I was, told that what to do, and it wasn't what was in the best interest of me or of Cynthia. And it's so when we talk about like the medical field, I also, there were outliers. There's outliers in every field, right? So those folks that were promoting smoking, most doctors, I think, knew that they were wrong. And there are people who are sellouts in every single discipline, right? But we also just came through an international pandemic that millions more of us could have just died, So it's just, it's not a matter of like distrusting people. It's a matter of finding out what are the facts, being able to discern them in a way that um, makes sense, that goes beyond opinion and has some basis in reality, in terms of like research and duplication of research, and all of those things are so important that we don't just rely on people's opinions. But when it becomes to like personal decision like this of adoption versus the other options that might or might not be on the table, I think that that those people need to listen to their own inner voice, and it's not just the anxiety voice in your head of the moral compass that's there of what's right or wrong for me.
Yeah. Thank you. I kind of rushed at that striker to pull a bullet at a china shop, didn't I? So thank you for calling me out on that. As you were talking, I thought, well, that this is just my opinion or their opinion, right? So so thank you, Suzanne. And I've clearly got a bit of a bee in my bonnet.
We all do at times.
I need to look at it. So I'm conscious of time, and I'm just wondering, if there's something that I've not asked that you'd like to, a question that I've not asked that you'd like to share, or share some insights on it, or whether we wrap it up.
I of course have been thinking about your question about what I would say to adoptees this whole time now. If I had any lesson, not advice, but any lesson that I think that I've learned that I sort of already knew, but was just super reinforced by this last year, it's the idea that love isn't finite. You don't have this sort of set amount of it. And that becomes very important in a situation where, suddenly there's a lot more people in your life, and your circle's expanded, and I just have so many more people to love all of a sudden. But it's always been an important distinction, I think, for me to make, that doesn't mean that the people who were already there get less, right? So like, that is a way that we can think of it, I think, that can be destructive, that if you're open and giving and give your love to this new person and this new connection, that's somehow taking away from what you had before. And it just really doesn't I mean, it does depend on how they, the people in your family and how they feel about it too, but it can be just this incredibly open, ever expanding circle of family and love.
Yeah. I think that was the outcome we were really hoping for, that it would be like this, where the whole family gets to reunite, and seeing my mother meet your mother last week or so
Yeah.
ago was pretty symbolic of how this whole thing has gone, of just how much gratitude there is, and just really willingness to be embraced a bigger family.
And one last thing, for a question for both of you. If you could, so I'll just say it, shall I? What would you call this? What would you call this conversation that we've had? What would be the title of the podcast episode?
Something to do with the journey.
How and the why.
No.
The how and the why. That's the title of my book.
Yeah.
That's about adoption. So
yeah, I was thinking something to do with what you said, Cynthia, about infinite love, actually.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
We're about to celebrate Thanksgiving next week, then week after that. And this will be, I think, the first year that we celebrate Thanksgiving with my mom and Suzanne together.
Brilliant.
So,
we're bringing both the families to the table, and it'll be lovely to have everybody together.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, and thank you, listeners, for listening. We will speak to you again very soon. Bye-bye.